Hey Phil, this is Cameron.
Hey, what's up, Kim?
Man, I gotta talk to you about something. Have you been watching the news?
Dude, what is going on? Pocket politics with Phil and Cam. Why? Why are we doing this?
I think it's gonna matter.
The only thing they want to talk about is guns and abortion.
My own views, I want to see the Republicans get away from the social issues.
I'm not saying that Republicans are idiots.
You hear something like that, it's powerful.
As an American, I was disgusted.
You could make the argument that you're probably more in the middle as well.
I think that's just a story that somebody's telling you.
Again, well, with the facts, this is true. Everybody knows
What
it.
facts?
So-
What facts? Who does this hurt more, Republicans or Democrats?
Boy, I've been thinking about that.
Welcome back to Pocket Politics. Cam, how was your week?
Yeah, it's good. How about yours?
Pretty good. Busy and working a lot, so that's always good. But we had a busy news week as well. So today we are going to start with Trump news. We've got the indictment last week. Got a chance to see what happened there. We've also got some news about embattled Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas making big news this week. We're going to talk about the Tennessee 3, and then we're going to look at a couple of elections. Hopefully you've had a chance to hear about this, but most of the elections were overshadowed this week by all the happenings around Trump. With that being said, Cam, you want to get us started?
All right, let's talk about Trump was indicted this week on 34 counts, and of course he pled not guilty. All right, this again stems back to his hush money payments that he made to adult film star Stormy Daniels. So, Phil, where does he go from here now? Is this going to help him short term with his voters? What's the long term effect? What do you got on that?
Yeah, so I don't know that this is going to help short term. It should be mentioned, though, that, we had previously thought, last week we talked about CNN leaking that there were 34 separate counts. Where we found out this week on Tuesday when he showed up to get processed in New York that they were 34 felony counts. So it wasn't just a few felonies. They were able to connect every single one to a felony. And a lot of people coming out, he had his kind of unhinged speech at Mar-a-Lago. The same talking points, airing out his own personal grievances that night after he had left New York. But I don't think it helps him. You know what I mean? It's clearly pushing his narrative and his talking points into a certain direction. And I've said it before, and we've talked about it multiple times. I don't think Trump does well when he just complains about his own conditions.
Yeah, I will say this. The majority of Americans now feel the indictment is justified. This is according to CNN, by the way. But the majority also feel there is some level of political bias against him in this particular indictment here. So short term, this may give him some momentum with his base. But interestingly enough, I saw a stat this morning that said his public approval is now down to 25%. That's the lowest I think it's ever been. So he seems to be shrinking. Now, the same public poll that I saw had him staying about the same as he always had been with Democrats and Republicans. No surprise there. I mean, you're probably dug in your position with him, but where he's really tanking is with the independents. Obviously, that doesn't bode well for him at all in a general election going forward. So, as far as the case itself goes, I still think this is probably the least of his concerns. It is an older case. I listened to an interview this morning on ABC with Bill Barr. He kind of said the same thing, but to Barr's credit, he quickly pivoted and said he thinks Trump's got some real problems on his hands with the classified documents case. So Barr was quick to point that out. And I kind of agree with Barr. I mean, I think he's got bigger fish to fry or bigger things looming on the horizon, however you want to say that. I don't know that this is necessarily one of them, but it's creating a political circus right now, just like almost everything does with Donald Trump. I think the real thing is how does this help him in the primary? He's already up in it. He's probably going to continue to be up in it. I don't see I just don't see him stumbling so much that he doesn't get the nomination. But again, seeing how he's just tanking with independents, I think this just piles on to what many people, including what you and I have been saying. He's got a tremendous mountain ahead of him to try and win a general election.
Yeah, and I don't know. The one thing I was thinking, and I think you and I had both agreed previously that he would probably most likely get the nomination because, again, as we've said before, the Republicans have a winner takes all kind of approach to nominating their candidate. The only problem with this too, and this is something that I'll have to research for next week because I'm sure we're going to revisit this again, is that there are states where you don't have to be registered as a Republican to vote in Republican primaries, and I don't know how many there are, but I know there's at least a handful, and that could actually seriously affect Trump, moving forward, because if this independent number is waning and continues to kind of go in the direction that it is, it's only going to get worse for him. And when those independents get themselves into a caucus or a primary vote, it could negatively affect his performance there. Now, we are looking for, I think, October or November for an actual trial. I've heard that the Trump campaign wants it to move to January, which is right around Iowa. I don't know if that's strategic. It doesn't seem like it would be a wise choice for him to be in trial and spending his weekends on the campaign trail. But who really knows where this is going? I mean, I agree with you. This is not the worst thing that he has going for him right now. There are probably other cases. It looks like this defamation lawsuit. He's going to be back in New York in a courtroom this week for the E. Jean Carroll case. And that's not even a big one, right? So there's plenty of other legal issues that he has.
Do you agree with Bill Barr that the classified documents may be the biggest one and the one that may really hammer him?
I don't think it's just the classified documents. I think it's the fact that Jack Smith is doing classified documents. He's also doing the January 6th stuff. He now is gonna get Pence, right? And I've heard a couple people ask, the one thing that they just want Pence to say, right, is to answer the question of why he didn't get in the car on January 6th to leave the Capitol with the Secret Service. You know what I mean? And I think that could be very damning. The word is that Pence is going to fully cooperate, contrary to others like Mark Meadows, who will probably just plead the fifth to every single question. But we'll see. We don't know yet.
I think Mike Pence will. I think it's in his nature to cooperate. I mean, now that he knows he has to, right? I don't see him lying on the stand or anything. I think Pence is the type of person, like him or not. I don't see him sitting there and putting on a facade or lying. That's just my opinion. I mean, we'll find out, obviously, but
Yeah, and Pence still has a little bit of a get out of jail free card, and the fact that he does maintain some level of executive privilege when it just comes to his conversations with Trump directly. So he's got that he doesn't have to worry about. But again, I think the question, the main question there is why did he not leave the Capitol when he was told to? You know what I mean? Because that could be a big indicator of kind of what's going on. But as a whole, yeah, I think Jack Smith is gonna put a lot more problems towards Trump than this E. Jean Carroll case, than this New York State case, all the other ones, right? And I also don't think that the Republicans are doing themselves any favors, right? Jim Jordan is trying to subpoena Alvin Bragg. One, it's not going to work because it's not legal, and two, it just makes them look like more of a circus.
okay. Well, again, this is going to certainly play. Speaking of circuses, I should say this will continue to be a political circus as we watch it going forward. But there was some other news this week with the judge in this case, Juan Merchan, who's been just hammered by Trump. He's been, all over his Truth Social talking about the judge and his wife and going on and on about her. But it did come out in the news this week that he has made some small contributions to Democrats, and he's under attack now for that. Okay, now I want to be clear. This is small. This is a total of $35 in contributions, is all I was able to read about this. CNN senior legal analyst and former federal prosecutor Eli Honig had this to say: while the amounts here are minimal, it's surprising that a sitting judge would make political donations of any size to a partisan candidate or cause. End quote. I'll just say this: I don't think it's a good look for the judge, and it's certainly going to be brought to light during the case. Credibility will come up. Um, so, I mean, there's that going on. Now, this will probably just add to the circus that is this case.
Yeah, I don't think this is going to do much. One, it's $35, right? While it may be a little bit questionable, there's nothing illegal about it, right? It's no different than, like, for example, a Hatch Act violation. Say when the former president did stuff on White House grounds, right, in support of his campaign. You know, if you went out and bought a $35 MAGA hat made in China, you wouldn't get kicked out of the military, right, or kicked out of service. So I just don't think this is a big deal. I think somebody raised a question and Republicans got all up in arms about it, and then some guy has to comment on it to CNN and just say, you know, exactly what Eli Honig said.
But again, it's not going to be a good look when this is already being, the whole political bias thing is already being questioned. Is it the end of the world? No, but again, it's just one more level of things that are out there that people can use to, throw mud on this case. So I don't think it's necessarily a good look. Again, though, it's not the only judge that's been in the news this week. We'll turn now to Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas and his whole trip thing now, if you will, trip scandal, I guess. And specifically, it's come out, he's accepted luxury trips from billionaire Republican donor Harlan Crow. Crow, a Texas real estate developer. Um, there's quite a bit here. I mean, in 2019, he went on an Indonesian island hopping trip. He and his wife did with the Crows. They took a chartered plane all about. They cruised around on a super yacht. They estimated this thing cost over $500,000.
Yeah, so one this is notable because there's been a lot of talk about Clarence Thomas and what has been going on. There's been a lot of talk about his wife's involvement, and look, nobody would really give a shit or care about Jenny Thomas. The problem is that they do because she was part of a coup, right? So you mentioned the $500,000 gifts. There were multiples, right? Multiple trips on private planes. There was even a trip somewhere else. I can't remember. It was like a kind of a camping style resort that they went to. And one of the things that I read was that, food, lodging, and entertainment received as personal hospitality of any individual does not need to be reported. And so that's kind of the justification that Clarence Thomas was using to not report this. Specifically because it was at a personal residence of an individual or family. But they're saying that the exception to reporting is it's not supposed to cover transportation or substitutes for commercial transportation, right? And so the fact that he was getting to and from these places on this guy's private jet is problematic, right?
Yeah, had read something similar too. Exactly, that this was, again, Thomas's thing about the gifts, why he didn't report it. Exactly what you said, but the transportation piece could be the issue here. Thomas has acknowledged that, hey, I wasn't aware I was supposed to report this, and I will certainly doing it going forward. He said he and his wife have been friends with the Crows for well over 20 years and have done many things with them over those 20-year time periods. I will say this: Senate Majority Whip Dick Durbin, a Democrat from Illinois, has said the Senate Judiciary Committee is going to act on this report. And Democrats from both chambers of Congress sent Chief Justice John Roberts a letter asking for a swift investigation. I haven't heard anything from Chief Justice Roberts on that.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, there's really, the Supreme Court doesn't have to follow any ethics rules, which is kind of kind of surprising to me, but that's the way it is. So we're not going to get any change to that probably in the meantime. But when we talk about the comparison, say a $35 contribution to a political action committee, or I think it was 3 political action committees, is quite a bit different than the fact that, Clarence Thomas looks now to have taken multiple gifts that are ethically unsound and also, potentially problematic and against the law, right? And at the same time, this guy hosted a huge event for Jenny Thomas's kind of political action. I don't know if it's a PAC, but it's some kind of political action group that she runs. So it certainly doesn't look good, right? And this is really just the state we're in, right? Whereas we have this kind of broken state in which now capitalism is in a position where we have the consequences of our broken economy influencing constitutional interpretation.
Yeah, I don't think this really is that big of a deal. I think Thomas realizes now that he's got to report it. I don't think anything's going to happen. If anything, you know what? Set a standard for Supreme Court judges and just hold them accountable going forward. Like I said, I mean, at the end of the day, you can be friends with people, and just because you're serving in public office, I don't think you should have to sever friendships. But I will say this: if there's a standard on what you're supposed to report, and I don't care who you are, then you should report it. And again, there's not really a whole lot of standards there for these Supreme Court justices. So again, set some kind of standard and be able to hold them to it. I think that's really the lesson here that's going to come forward. I don't see a whole lot coming to this though.
Yeah, but I will agree with you that I do think that it's time that we have an ethics, kind of standard for the Supreme Court. I mean, I don't think many people would argue that, and I think this is just probably the first we're going to see of a bunch of signs that it's time for that to happen.
Yeah. So again, we'll see what comes of it. But in the meantime, there's been other news this week. Big one out of the state of Tennessee that was all over the news later in the week. That is 3 Tennessee state reps, Justin Jones, Justin Pearson, and Gloria Johnson, were taking part in a rally, if you will, for gun violence. And then 2 of those members, Jones and Pearson, found themselves expelled over some issues here in the Tennessee State House. Particularly, they came in and according to Tennessee Republicans, at least state representative Republicans, they said that these 3 in particular, and then the 3 were disrupting the House, if you will, and Jones and Pearson were yelling into a megaphone, etc. Turned into a circus. I saw some clips from the House floor. It looked like a circus. And that's probably being kind when I say that. But again, they come to a vote and they decide to expel 2 of the 3. The 2 they expelled, Jones and Pearson. Johnson was not.
Yeah, what do you think the difference is? Why do you think that they expelled Justin Jones and Justin Pearson and not Gloria Johnson?
Because they were yelling into a megaphone, and when the
You think that's what it was? Are you
yes, I do.
serious?
Yes, I do. I'm being
Okay.
100% serious. And I know where you're going with this, and I've heard the media. They immediately jumped on it and said that it's because these 2 individuals were African American and Johnson is not. I don't believe that for a second. And I will tell you this: I think to accuse someone of racism, regardless of what side of the racist thing you want to be on, I think to accuse anyone of that is pretty powerful without knowing that for a fact it is racism. So what I
Yeah,
saw
I
was
don't think it's necessarily. I don't think it's necessarily an accusation. I think it's just a pretty blatant understanding of what is going on here.
yeah, I disagree entirely. When I saw the Speaker of the House down in Tennessee, name's Cameron Sexton, trying to get the House in order, and these 2 gentlemen were just not doing it. They weren't following the rules. And I will say this too: these votes were very close. Okay, Jones was expelled by a 72-25 vote. Pearson 69-26. I say close. Now let me back up. They weren't close in that regard, but what I should say is Johnson, she was close to being expelled also. She was only saved by 1 vote. So yeah, I don't think there is. Here's what I think about this whole thing, and I'll just say this: it's been all over the news. I don't personally know what the Tennessee Republicans were doing here. Okay, and I want to say this: you have a massive majority in the House of Representatives in Tennessee. Okay, a
And
massive
the
one.
Tennessee Senate too.
Okay, but speaking of, sure, fine, the Senate as well. So you are going to get your way. All right. Here's the thing: what you did now is you put these people all over the news and they're all over the headlines. When in reality, take a look at the case and say, hey, look, you were violating this, that, and the other. Okay, here you go. We're going to now whatever, take you off a committee or punish you in whatever their state rules say they can do in the House. I don't know. I'm not familiar with all of them, whatever, but I'm sure there are forms of punishment you can do. Instead, they come in and they kick them out. And again, they are now all over the television. They're all over the news. They're all over the internet. These people are now, in the mainstream media, if you will. When in before this, I had never heard of these three, and I would be willing to bet the majority of Americans hadn't heard of them either. And here's the thing, right? They're going to be right back in probably this in within a week. So I don't know what they were doing. I disagree with what these three were doing. I do. I really do. But I think there was other ways to handle this, and I think the way they chose to handle it has now blown up in their face.
Yeah, so I'm not gonna disagree with most of what you just said. What's gonna happen is this is gonna go to a special election, right? These three are gonna get put right back into the spots that they were expelled from because they have overwhelming support in their districts. Again, some of the Republicans in Tennessee were calling this an insurrection, which is completely ridiculous, right? And let's just be clear. The one thing that I don't agree with you on is that you're taking the hard line on they violated rules. These were just decorum rules, right? These were not ethics rules. These were not laws. These are just decorum rules. And that stuff happens all the time, especially at the state level. It's not, nothing about this is unprecedented other than the fact that the majority, the supermajority in the Tennessee House, used their power to expel two lawmakers who were elected by their constituents to go represent them. And I think it's a bad move. I think this is again Republicans stepping on a rake effectively. And I will say that one, it doesn't work. Two, it looks bad. And three, I don't like to use these words like, autocratic, but that's kind of effectively what this is.
Well, I'll just go back and say this yet
There, I
again,
mean,
right?
there. Hold on. I'm asking the question, right? Using your political power to stop voices that don't agree with you is effectively autocratic.
So again, are you? Is that your statement, or you're asking me? I guess I'm unclear.
I'm
I,
saying, is there any way that that kind of behavior could be determined as anything else?
I mean, depends on how you want to look at it. I guess I don't
I
know.
mean, it doesn't really. What
I
is
what
if you're using your political power to stop people who don't agree with you from voicing their opinion in this country? That's undemocratic.
well, let's go back.
That's autocracy.
Let's go back to what I just said. They are so overwhelmingly in the minority. What does it matter? I mean, honestly, these three are irrelevant in Tennessee politics, but they aren't anymore because we've sat here and talked about them for the last 5 or 10 minutes. And every news nation or every, not news nation, I'm sorry. Well, they're probably talking about them too, but every news channel in the country is talking about them. And I mean, I hate to just say a person is irrelevant, but they're in such minority in that state that it's just so hard to like. I look at this, right? It's hard for them to really get anything across, being that there's so few Democrats in the state of Tennessee, right? I don't know what the Tennessee Republicans were really doing here. I really don't. I mean, I hate to say they got nothing to worry about from the other side of the aisle, but they really don't. And I'll be honest with you, I mean, I don't see much changing anytime soon in Tennessee. So all they've done is shined a national spotlight on this now. So I don't see anything really changing in their state, maybe now nationally. But again, the way the news cycle goes, this will probably be out of the news in the next couple of weeks. Um, I mean, yeah, I guess that's what I'm getting at with this. I think they made a mistake doing this to a group of people that really didn't have a whole lot going on, but now have an awful lot going on.
Yeah. So do you don't think that this is going to hurt Republicans in Tennessee?
No, that is a massively red state, and I looked this up earlier. Outside, there are three basic areas of I shouldn't say three basic areas. There's three areas that are Democratic in the state of Tennessee, right? And that's Memphis, that is suburbs and parts of Nashville, and then the Knoxville area and Knox County, which is where Johnson represents. So um, let me get this straight here. Mr. Jones represents the Nashville area. Pearson is the Memphis area, and then Johnson's that Knoxville area. Those are really the three big Democratic areas. The rest of the state, massively Republican by big margins. And so, no, I don't see this affecting things at all in the state of Tennessee. And like I said, it really wouldn't have, had they just punished them with a, I don't know, committee thing or whatever, nothing would be going on. It's been blown
Yeah,
up
or
to a
even just
national thing.
yeah, I've heard even that it could have been just as simple as a censure. You know what I mean?
It could have been. It could have been. I like I said, I just think that they made a mistake for. I just don't know what their reasoning was. I mean, they have, like I said, I don't think they have anything to fear from Democrats in that state because they're just so few of them.
Okay. So before we move on, I just wanted to ask you. So this is not the first iteration of the so-called Tennessee Three. Do you, by any chance, know what the first Tennessee Three was?
I no, I don't.
So, fun fact, I guess the first Tennessee Three was actually the backing band for Johnny Cash for 25 years.
Interesting. All right.
Yep.
Yeah. I guess you learn something every day.
Yeah, it was funny when I Googled it. Surprisingly, that was the first thing that came up.
Huh. Interesting. All right. Well, Phil, why don't we move, since we're talking about elections and we're talking about things going on at the state level, why don't we look at some elections here from this past week, specifically two of them that are probably almost went under the radar, largely because of the whole Donald Trump thing. Let's start with the Chicago's mayor race. And that one, we had Brandon Johnson defeating Paul Vallis, fairly close one, 51% to 49%. What do you think on that one?
Yeah, so I think that this shows, granted it is Chicago, right? Chicago is a fairly, pretty much blue overall. But I think it's notable that Brandon Johnson, won by effectively 4+ points, in this race, right? And we can go back to the February election that sent this to a runoff. And if you remember, Paul Vallis won, had like 11% advantage over Brandon Johnson. And so with all things considered, we're looking at like a 15-point swing in this thing.
Yeah, I mean, something that is interesting though to that, Phil, is let's not forget Lori Lightfoot. She had people voting for her in that February race, and she garnered about 19% of the vote. I was kind of actually thinking about that, and maybe a lot of those that voted for Lightfoot perhaps went on excuse me, Johnson's side, which may have been what swung it. I don't know. What do you think on that? You think a lot of Lightfoot voters went for him?
I mean, I definitely think there were Lightfoot voters that switched because I don't know how else you get a 15-point swing in 2 months effectively without gaining some of that support. But what I do think is interesting is that Paul Vallis was largely more of a moderate Democrat, right? And I think this is a signal of maybe not the entire country, but in small kind of small view politics, right? That people are moving as a whole a little bit more progressive because a lot of the things that Johnson ran on was pro union, giving stuff for teachers, right? He's by far way more progressive and to the left of Vallis. And he made that known, and he was still able to carry on this win and swing a lot of votes.
Yeah, so I was surprised by it actually. I mean, I still consider it a fairly close race. I mean, again, 51 to 49% is pretty close. I think at the end of the day, I'll explain this victory this way. Again, I think some of it was the Lightfoot voters swinging his way, but also I think Chicago is just a pretty blue area, as you mentioned earlier. I read what Johnson's agenda is coming into office. He's got a very progressive agenda, is what he's going to try and push for, and so I just think that some of this is a result of Chicago. I'll disagree with you in that I don't think the country is going more progressive necessarily, but there are clearly progressive pockets, right? And so you take a city like Chicago, I think we see that there. Let's not forget, too, I mean, Johnson did get some big endorsements, right? He had Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren came in and were endorsing him. And so I'm sure that helped him. Vallis, he was backed by Dick Durbin, who probably more of a mainstream Democrat, I guess, if you will. So personally, I was kind of surprised. I thought, based on what we saw back in February, Vallis was going to win this one. As you mentioned, Phil, he was kind of more of the moderate. He had the police unions backing him and all that. But in the end, Johnson prevailed in this one. And so we are going to see Governor Johnson now leading Chicago.
Yeah, and I just wanted to correct you on one thing. It wasn't 51 to 49, so it was
Well, that's what
four points.
I read 51 to 49 this morning in an article that I was reading. Now to be fair,
Yes.
maybe
So
maybe
it was
there's been a bunch of mail-in ballots, because I did read there were more mail-in ballots to count. Is that maybe what brought the totals up?
well once so with the vote in the April 4th runoff results officially were 52.1 to 47.9. So it was a
Okay.
4 point swing. So
Okay, I guess it was. Again, I read something that said 51 to 49. You know what? Those still sound fairly close to me. I mean, anything under 5 points, I consider a relatively close race. And what I did
yeah,
read,
I think it's close.
and what I read the other day too was, and this again may have swung things a little bit, was there was a bunch of absentee ballots to count, and so maybe they've been counting them, and that has driven it up more. Regardless, though, again, we've got Mayor Johnson going to lead Chicago. Uh, so, Phil, why don't we look at another big race that really fell under the radar very much? So, I don't think many people in the country were even tracking this one, and that is just north of Chicago in the state of Wisconsin. They had a Supreme Court race this past week, and we saw Janet Protasewicz. I always butcher her last name.
Protasewicz.
Protasewicz. I've been butchering that all week, and I knew I'd do it again this today. Anyway, Protasewicz. She defeated
If it makes you feel any better, I spelled it phonetically in my notes so that I wouldn't screw it up.
Well, you can just keep correcting me because I'll probably keep butchering it. I'll just say Wisconsin Supreme Court Justice-elect Janet. There you go. Anyway, she defeats Dan Kelly up in that state. This is the first time now the Wisconsin State Supreme Court has gone to liberals for the first time in 15 years. Okay, the liberals now have the majority there, 4-3 in the state. Abortion was a big part of this race. Dan Kelly was a hardline no on abortion. And Miss Janet, help me out there. Protasewicz. I'm going to keep butchering that up. Janet Protasewicz was all about reproductive rights in this one. We see abortion rearing its head yet again in an election race. It looked like they had pretty high turnout. I read 36% voter turnout. Now that may sound low, right? Somebody hearing us talk about this and says 36%, man, that doesn't sound like anybody's getting out to vote. No, that's actually pretty high for an election that's held in the springtime that has nothing to do with a presidential election or anything like that. So, Phil, I mean, what do you think on this one?
Well, so a couple things, right? So I saw a kind of Steve Kornacki. I know you and I both love this guy, but he was doing a breakdown looking at the Wisconsin state map, on Wednesday, and one of the things that he pointed out that I thought was pretty interesting is that he showed how a lot of districts that went for Trump, even in 2020 and 2016, had swung heavily in this one and carried Protasewicz by multiple points, sometimes even in the double-digit numbers. And so, one, I think that there's a shift there, and I think the bigger part of this is you mentioned the abortion thing, but this is, again, right. This is the lingering effect of the Dobbs decision, and I know you and I kind of had when this whole decision came down last year. We recorded a blockbuster episode that was full of speculation on how this was going to affect conservatives and the Republican Party as a whole. And I think you and I both agree that this was going to have a major effect on their politics. Whether it's short term or long term, I think we're starting to see that it may have been major effects in the short term and the long term, because we're starting to see this thing trickle down. Dan Kelly, right, while he did not get the nomination this time, the endorsement this time, he had previously been endorsed by Trump. He also is kind of controversial, right? Dan Kelly participated in the fake electoral schemes leading up to January 6th, so I don't think that really helped his case either, because he got called out in several, state news organizations and local news organizations. And one of the things that they were saying is that when you look at Madison as a whole, right? Madison is fairly blue and votes fairly blue, but there's parts around in the suburbs of that county that have been red for the last two major general elections. And some of those counties, again, they won back. They went blue in this election for quite some time. So I think that we're seeing lingering effects of the Dobbs decision. And just as a whole, this is going to be very impactful for Wisconsin. There was some talk that with a supermajority, a bicameral supermajority in the state, Republicans could just impeach Janet Protasiewicz and get rid of her. But the leader of the Senate already came out and said that's not happening. And if they were to do that anyway, then the Democratic governor, Tony Evers, would be able to just appoint the replacement, in which he could just appoint Janet Protasiewicz back in.
I mean, again, that would start some political round and round circus that would get us nowhere. But you talk about the Dobbs decision. I mean, there's no doubt this had a big impact here. I saw a clip this morning on one of the news segments where they were discussing a Wall Street Journal opinion piece. And forgive me, I don't remember the author of this piece, but essentially what the author had just said in his writing was that we, being Republicans, have got to get on the right side of this abortion issue, or we are going to lose again in 2024 and continue to lose in the future. I saw a video clip of Lindsey Graham this morning, almost trying to moderate his stance on abortion, saying, "Well, I think we can come up with an abortion solution that kind of makes sense and has exceptions for this, that, and the other, and kind of come to a consensus, or not consensus, but kind of come to some kind of a compromise on this thing." Graham in the past has kind of sounded like more of a hardline abortion guy. And so I think as we look to the future, this is something that the Republicans are going to have to get on the right side of. I mean, this will continue to hurt them. We have seen this, right? In
Yeah,
Kansas,
well,
we've seen this in a whole bunch of states, right? This comes up on the ballot. This is something that hurts them, and so they're going to have to figure this one out.
but I just don't think they're. I think they're behind it. I think the point is that regardless of what Graham says, right? People can flash back to him saying that he was going to propose a nationwide 6 weeks ban not even 6 months ago,
It was
right?
actually, Phil, it was actually 15 weeks. It was actually 15
Okay,
weeks, to be fair to the center. But still, that's what I was saying, though,
but
Phil. I was
yeah,
to my
voters still don't want that.
I no no Phil, let me finish. So the point I was trying to make, though, was all of a sudden here comes Lindsey Graham trying to sound like he's the compromise man on this one. I guess what I'm saying is maybe some people are trying to moderate their stance in the GOP on this one. I think they're going to need to, though, going forward, because like I said, this one has been a big, big thing in elections. And again, we saw it last year when you and I were shocked. Not just you and I, the whole nation was shocked seeing what came out of Kansas when we saw very red rural counties in western Kansas that were going Trump by like 80%, or whatever, 80% Trump, 20% Biden were voting, to keep abortion rights. So it's just something that when it comes up on the ballot, it does not fare well for Republicans. I'll just say that.
Yeah, I just the problem with that is I think that this is going to be coming up on the ballot again and again, right? Ron DeSantis in Florida is now trying to push for a 6 week ban. Um, and I just don't think I think they're so far behind this issue that they're not going to be able to recover that in the immediate future, right? They're not going to be able to recover by 2024, and they're not going to be able to recover probably by 2026, and it's going to hurt them moving forward. I do think that while people's political memory is very short, this is hitting in a different way, and it's going to linger a lot longer than a lot of things that Republicans normally do that people may or may not like.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's no doubt again that it's influencing. Part of the problem, right, has been that the pro-life movement, right, has contributed so much money to the Republicans, and they have right, helped him with organizing and all kinds of events over the years. That, when this whole Dobbs decision came out, I mean, it was almost like the dog that had finally caught the car. Yeah, and it was like, oh geez, now I've been chasing this car forever and a day, and I finally caught it. Now what do I do? And I really think that was kind of the moment there. It was like, oh man, this was that issue that brought us all kinds of money and galvanized us support here and there. But now all of a sudden it's been overturned, and oh wait, and what do we do? And I just, yeah, I think they don't really know what to do at this point. So
And they're going to have trouble walking it back because they have, you're right, a lot of those donations and a lot of that support comes from this evangelical side. Um, the Hobby Lobby per se, is where a lot of that money comes from.
depending on the candidate, right? Depending on the candidate, certainly some that have been in politics for a number of years. Now, we did see, uh, flashes of candidates, right, in the last fall's election. Out in Colorado, right, there was the Senate race going out there. You had on the GOP side, you saw it where I can't even remember the guy's name in Colorado that was running anymore. I mean, we talked about him in several episodes. The Senate Republican Senate. You remember it, Phil?
Yes, Bennett for Senate,
Well, Bennett was the Democrat, but I
the
mean, who was
Democrat. Yeah,
the Republican? It was Joe something, wasn't it? I forget his
yeah, I
name.
don't remember now.
Regardless, though, right? He was one that came out and said he was a pro-choice Republican, and he stood very firm on that issue. Again, he didn't win, but we saw it with him. Governor Chris Sununu up in New Hampshire talks about himself being a pro-choice Republican. There are some, but Phil, you mentioned it. A lot of them have taken that very hard pro-life stance for a long time. So it is something, right, in elections, at least, for those that are currently in office or seek to get office in the near future on the Republican side, are going to have to figure that issue out. Speaking of Republicans, though, that are seeking office, there was also another news story this week. George Santos, who we haven't talked about here in several episodes, he has found himself with a primary challenger now for the next election. That is a man named Kellen Curry. He is going to challenge Mr. Santos, well, provided Santos even runs again. But Kellen Curry himself announced this week he is going to seek a Republican nomination for New York's 3rd District. Again, that's currently held by George Santos. Mr. Curry is an Air Force veteran who served 2 tours in Afghanistan. He was a former vice president at J.P. Morgan. Um, yeah, I mean, honestly, seeing this guy get in the race, and Phil, I'm going to be honest with you, I don't know a whole lot about this man, but just the fact that he's getting in the race and he looks like he's got, some credentials behind him, I think this spells doom for Santos. You and I have talked about it before, right? This is one of those districts that could easily flip back to a Democrat. But I'll be honest with you, it doesn't even look like Santos is going to be around to face a Democrat. I mean, this guy Curry could easily knock him off in a primary, or somebody else, I suppose, that challenges him in a primary. Don't you kind of agree with me, Phil? This spells big trouble for Santos.
Yeah, I do. I think not only does this spell huge trouble for Santos, but it spells trouble for the Republicans in New York. I mean, Santos poisoned the well here, right? There's no other kind of way to say it, right? This is a district that has gone both ways in the past, and recently it has gone, blue. The last 2 elections, it went blue, and so it's with basically one Republican other than George Santos being in there for a 20-year period since 1983. It's been blue, right? So I think that what Santos did was poison the well here. He's got this Republican primary challenger now, so we know that he's probably going to get primaried out. But I wouldn't be surprised if this turns New York's 3rd congressional district blue again.
I mean, maybe. I want to be fair to Mr. Curry, though. I don't know a lot about him. I think he most certainly knocks Santos off in a primary, but how he fares up against a Democrat, I'm unsure of at this point, because I don't really know much about him other than, that he was at JP Morgan and in the Air Force, but I don't really know what his political positions are or anything. So I think, to be fair to him, we'll just see what kind of a candidate he turns out to be. But what we talked about at the start of this little segment here was, I think this spells doom for Santos. I don't even think. I mean, Phil, don't you think this Curry probably knocks him off, or somebody else in the primary knocks him off?
I have no doubt that's what's going to happen. I think that's we could just call it now, and we're probably going to be right in a year and a half from now. You know what I mean?
In other words, we'll be talking about Kellen Curry versus a Democrat in November of 2024 for the election.
Yeah, exactly. So, with that being said, before we get to our parting shots, I think, I just want to put the word out there. Please go visit us on our social media sites. You can link to all of them, as well as getting to our YouTube from pocketpolitics.co. We appreciate the engagement. We appreciate all our listeners. So, thank you again for tuning in. And with that being said, Cam, what's your parting shot?
All right. Well, this week for my parting shot, I want to talk about snakes on a plane, or particularly one snake on a plane. Let's go to South Africa. All right, where there was a plane flying out of South Africa. That a plane was the pilot, along with four colleagues, was flying along when the pilot of this plane said he felt a cold sensation underneath his shirt and in his hip area. And he said at first he thought it was just his water bottle leaking. Then he looks down and happens to see the head of a snake, and actually the head of a cobra down there, as it basically crawls out of his flight suit, his clothing, if you will, and then starts to crawl down and underneath his seat. So this gentleman in the air, he's trying to fly this plane, now has to basically calm himself down and then radio back to the nearest airport so they can make an emergency landing with his plane, which he does successfully. And once they get down and they get everybody off the plane, the last thing that he noticed was that cobra was up under his seat in his plane. Then a little bit later, maintenance crew came out to find said snake, and the snake was gone. And after an exhaustive research of pretty much tearing the plane apart, they could not find the snake. So the only thing they can think of was this particular cobra slithered off somewhere into the South African bushes. And so, yeah, quite the story there, ladies and gentlemen. So if you would like to know more about it, I have linked up the CNN article all about this thing on our Facebook page. Go and check it out. I think that's a pretty wild story there. Phil, over to you.
All right. So another thing that flew under the radar, probably for a lot of people, just because we're probably tired of hearing about it and really don't care. But Elon Musk is back in the news because this week, shortly after 11 p.m. Eastern on Monday, he changed the Twitter symbol to a Shiba Inu dog, which, I don't know. I think it didn't last very long. But that dog is a symbol associated with Dogecoin, a cryptocurrency, and this is all happening, right? He's kind of, it looks again like he's going to dabble in manipulating the price of cryptocurrency, while he is currently facing a $258 billion class action lawsuit in federal court, accused of engaging in a pyramid scheme by promoting cryptocurrency. So, what exactly happens here, I don't know, but it doesn't look good. And again, this is, a billionaire brat effectively trying to, rob people of their hard-earned money by manipulating cryptocurrency. So we will see. I read something that said that the price for this particular cryptocurrency went from about 1 cent to $1. So that's 100% increase after he changed the logo. But we will see. Again, he is currently under a $258 billion class action lawsuit for doing this in the past. So have that for what it's worth. Cam, anything else?
No, I think this has been another good show, and again, certainly a big list, or a big thank you to all of our listeners. Please continue to follow us on our social media and listen to our podcast and give us support. We truly do appreciate it. Other than that, Phil, I got nothing else. I think it's time we wrap this one up.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, with that being said, we'll see you guys next week.
All right. Until next time.
Bye.